cop ridicules black woman in court until she reveals her Supreme Court Justice badge. They say fate has a twisted sense of humor, especially when pride and prejudice clash in the most unexpected places. In a modest courtroom where routine cases usually go unnoticed, an overconfident police officer with a hidden agenda confronts a composed black woman. He assumes she's an easy target for ridicule, belittling her very presence. But within the charged atmosphere, the power dynamic shifts in an instant. A simple revelation turns the situation on its head. This seemingly unremarkable woman holds authority and status that even the most audacious bigot cannot ignore. What follows is a whirlwind of drama, reckoning, and shocking revelations that no one could have predicted. The morning sun had barely begun its slow ascent over the horizon when Officer Gerald "Jerry" Stone strolled out of the local diner, a half-eaten donut in one hand and a large paper cup of black coffee in the other. Those who frequented Dave's diner at dawn had long grown accustomed to Jerry's presence. He made it his business to patrol the area, searching for any signs of trouble, though, in reality, trouble was simply a word he used for anyone who didn't fit his personal standards of acceptability. Jerry had served as a police officer in Stonebridge for nearly 20 years. The town, located just south of Richmond, Virginia, was steeped in old traditions, some admirable, others deeply flawed. Though it prided itself on Southern hospitality, Stonebridge wasn't immune to the undercurrents of racial tension and distrust that simmered in many communities. Jerry, a stocky man with a buzz cut and steely gray eyes, wore his uniform not as a badge of service, but as a suit of entitlement. As he made his way toward his cruiser, he acknowledged a few townsfolk with curt nods, purposefully ignoring those he deemed unworthy of recognition. Jerry had always harbored a particular disdain for individuals he considered to be out of line, people who, in his mind, didn't know their place. And in Jerry's world, knowing one's place often meant being submissive. He climbed into his cruiser, switched on the radio, and waited for any dispatch calls. It wasn't long before one came through. A routine traffic stop had escalated. A woman had refused to sign a ticket, requiring her to make a court appearance that very morning. Jerry recognized the name, Gabrielle Townend, just another outsider who had moved to Stonebridge recently. He had never met her before, but that didn't stop him from assuming the worst. At exactly 9 a.m., Jerry pulled into the courthouse parking lot, sliding into a spot reserved for law enforcement. The Stonebridge Municipal Court was a small, aging building with chipped paint and weathered columns. A large brass plaque near the entrance read, "Dedicated to equal justice for all," though in Jerry's view the definition of all was highly selective. Inside the main hallway, a handful of lawyers, defendants, and concerned family members lingered, waiting for their turn before the judge. Jerry's presence made some of them shift uncomfortably. Those who recognized him knew his reputation. Others simply sensed the cold authority he exuded. In a quiet corner, near a long wooden bench, stood Gabrielle Townend. She was dressed in a sleek black blazer and matching skirt, her posture poised yet unassuming. A leather portfolio rested under her arm, her expression calm despite the commotion around her. There was an undeniable elegance in the way she moved, as if she were walking marble floors rather than the scuffed tiles of a small-town courthouse. Jerry watched her from across the hall, immediately irritated by her composure. He was used to seeing people look anxious, worried, or defensive in these halls, especially those appearing before Judge Lewis. But this woman radiated quiet confidence, and that alone made Jerry's guard rise. He strode toward her, lowering his voice to an authoritative tone. "You Gabrielle Townend?" he asked, never bothering with a proper introduction. She turned slightly, meeting his gaze, and nodded. "I am." His lips curled into a smirk. "I hear you caused quite the scene earlier, refusing to sign a citation. That kind of behavior might fly in the big city, but Stonebridge doesn't take kindly to folks thinking they can ignore the law." Gabrielle's expression remained composed, though a flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. "I wasn't refusing," she corrected smoothly. "I wanted time to read it carefully because it appeared to be incorrectly issued." The officer took offense. Jerry chuckled, though there was no humor in it. That's your version of events. Let's see how it holds up in court." He gestured for her to walk ahead of him into the courtroom. She complied, moving with the same quiet grace that had irked him moments before. Jerry followed close behind, his fingers absently grazing the items on his belt. His cuffs, his firearm, reminding himself that this was his turf. His authority wouldn't be questioned. As they stepped into the courtroom, the wooden pew-like benches were half-filled with onlookers. At the front, Judge Marion Lewis presided, a seasoned figure in the town's legal system, known for his stern but generally fair approach. He glanced up as Gabrielle and Jerry entered, offering a brief nod before signaling for the case to proceed. The court clerk read out the charges: failure to comply with a traffic stop, refusal to sign a citation, and obstruction of an officer. A ridiculous trifecta, in Gabrielle's opinion. All of this stemmed from a single moment, her simple request for clarification. Yet, Gabrielle maintained her composure, offering no outward reaction. Jerry, emboldened by the formal recitation of the charges, stood to the side, delivering his version of events to Judge Lewis. He painted a dramatic picture of a defiant woman openly challenging the authority of a sworn officer. According to Jerry, Gabrielle's calm request to review the citation had escalated into outright refusal and confrontation. His exaggerations filled the air, but he delivered them with the confidence of someone accustomed to going unchallenged. When it was Gabrielle's turn to speak, she addressed the court with measured precision. "Your Honor, the officer who stopped me insisted that I sign a citation for speeding in a school zone. I asked him to show me the posted signs or provide any proof that I had exceeded the limit, given that I was within 25 miles per hour. He refused to present any evidence and instead demanded my immediate signature. When I continued to ask for clarification, he threatened me with arrest. I merely wanted to understand the basis of the citation before admitting fault." Judge Lewis tapped a pencil against his bench. "That's quite a difference in accounts, Officer Stone. You claim Ms. Townend was obstructing an officer in the line of duty, yet she states she was simply seeking clarification. Do we have dashcam footage?" Jerry shifted uncomfortably. "The dashcam malfunctioned," he muttered. A brief pause.
No usable footage.
A faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered across Gabrielle's face. That malfunction seemed suspiciously convenient. Jerry's narrative was already beginning to unravel under the lightest scrutiny. Yet, in Stonebridge, the word of a local officer often carried far more weight than that of an outsider. Judge Lewis cleared his throat. "I'm scheduling a second hearing. In the meantime, Ms. Townend, you remain under this court's jurisdiction. Do not leave town without notifying us." "Understood." Gabrielle gave a composed nod. "Understood, Your Honor." A wave of satisfaction washed over Jerry as the judge adjourned the session. Though he hadn't secured a conviction, he relished the fact that this outsider was now entangled in Stonebridge's legal web. She wouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon. Gabrielle tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear and placed her portfolio on the table, organizing her documents. Jerry couldn't resist. He sauntered closer, exuding smugness. "You see, people come in here thinking they can talk their way around the law," he said in a low, mocking voice. "Doesn't matter what fancy words you throw around. Stonebridge has its own way of doing things. You'll learn that soon enough." Gabrielle met his gaze steadily. "I respect the law, Officer Stone, but respect is a two-way street." Jerry let out a sharp, humorless chuckle. "The day I owe you any respect is the day hell freezes over." She didn't reply. Instead, she calmly gathered her papers and walked out of the courtroom, leaving Jerry standing there, simmering with irritation. He was convinced she was nothing but trouble, someone who thought she could push back against a system that had worked just fine for him all these years. It never occurred to him that she might have good reason, or that she possessed a level of power beyond his comprehension. What Jerry Stone failed to realize was that Gabrielle Townend was no stranger to courtrooms or to prejudice. She had faced far more insidious and widespread discrimination than anything Stonebridge could muster. And soon, much sooner than he expected, he would learn just how far out of his depth he truly was. As Gabrielle stepped out of the courthouse, she inhaled the crisp morning air and allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She glanced back at the aging building, remembering the judge's warning not to leave town. A quiet laugh almost escaped her. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Had anyone known who she truly was, they wouldn't be restricting her movement. They'd be asking for her autograph. Her car, a modest sedan, was parked at the far edge of the lot. She slipped behind the wheel, set down her leather portfolio, and let her gaze drift toward the small businesses lining Main Street. On the surface, Stonebridge exuded a picturesque charm. American flags hung from lampposts, flower baskets swayed in the breeze, and families strolled along the sidewalks. Yet beneath that quaint facade, there was a tension she recognized all too well. Gabrielle was no stranger to prejudice or small-town hostility. She had come a long way from her early days in a struggling Chicago neighborhood. Her path had taken her through prestigious universities, law schools, clerkships, and ultimately to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court of the United States. Yes, Gabrielle Townend was not merely a lawyer, not just a judge. She was a Supreme Court justice. Appointed 2 years prior, her confirmation had been hailed as a historic step forward. Yet, she had requested a rare sabbatical, her first extended leave from the bench, to handle personal matters, for reasons known only to a select few in her inner circle. This sabbatical was meant to be quiet, private. No security detail, no media attention, no staff. She had believed a place like Stonebridge would offer her anonymity, that she could move through this town unnoticed, just another citizen. She had been wrong. She hadn't anticipated that an overzealous small-town officer would twist a minor traffic stop into something much bigger. But rather than reacting with anger, Gabrielle turned her frustration into focus. Something wasn't right here. She could feel it. The locals spoke of a system that felt rigged, one that served only those who had always been in power. And at the center of it all stood Jerry Stone, always ready to intimidate newcomers, always eager to stir up trouble under the guise of enforcing the law. She was determined to see this through, not just for herself, but for the principle of justice. Meanwhile, Jerry Stone pulled out of the courthouse parking lot. A smug grin stretched across his face. The small victory of ensnaring Gabrielle in legal red tape had made his day. He had noticed the way she carried herself, exuding an air of confidence, and decided he would enjoy knocking her down a peg or two. Jerry drove straight to his usual haunt, a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town called Dugan's. Even though it was barely noon, he was eager to brag about his morning to the handful of regulars nursing beers at this hour. As he pushed open the door, a stale mixture of liquor and cigarette smoke engulfed him. A few heads turned, some offering half-hearted nods, acknowledging his presence more out of habit than genuine welcome. At a far table sat his friend, Deputy Hank Watson, flipping through a local newspaper. Hank wasn't exactly Jerry's mirror image. He had moments of doubt and quiet regret about some of their methods, but he usually went along, too hesitant to challenge a senior officer. Jerry dropped into the seat across from Hank, stretching out his legs and lighting a cigarette, completely ignoring the "No smoking" sign. "Guess who just put a stuck-up city girl in her place?" Jerry announced, exhaling a cloud of smoke. Hank glanced up, weariness in his brown eyes. "Stone, what did you do this time?" Jerry launched into a boastful retelling of the morning's events, embellishing the details to make himself the hero. He described how he had ensured the judge saw Gabrielle Townend as a troublemaker, how she was now legally bound to remain in Stonebridge. Conveniently, he left out the part where the judge had seemed unimpressed by the missing dashcam footage. Instead, he spun the story as if he had personally prevented some arrogant outsider from worming her way out of a ticket. Hank listened in silence, neither encouraging nor condemning Jerry's actions. Deep down, something about it unsettled him. He knew all too well how Stonebridge's system often encouraged them to uphold questionable arrests. And with Jerry at the helm, those arrests disproportionately affected black residents and newcomers. But Hank wasn't the type to stir trouble. He had a mortgage, a family, and a job he didn't want to lose. When Jerry finally wrapped up his exaggerated tale, he leaned back with a smug grin. "She's not going anywhere anytime soon," he said, satisfied. "And I plan to keep an eye on her." Hank set down the newspaper, his expression unreadable. "I just hope you're not biting off more than you can chew. Folks who stand that tall usually have something behind them." Jerry scoffed. "Trust me, Hank, I've seen her type before. Fancy degrees, big words, thinking they can run circles around us. She's got nothing on me." "Sure," Hank murmured, his tone unreadable. "Whatever you say." Jerry crushed his cigarette in the ashtray, stood up, and strode out of the bar with an air of self-importance. Hank watched him go, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. There were lines that shouldn't be crossed, and Jerry seemed determined to bulldoze right through them. Back in her car, Gabrielle drove to a small bed and breakfast on the outskirts of Stonebridge, the Magnolia Inn. It was a charming place, run by an elderly couple, Samuel and Bernice Howard, who had welcomed her warmly the moment she walked through the door. If they recognized her from the news, they said nothing. She had booked the room under her birth name, Gabrielle Davis, keeping her more public identity carefully hidden. The inn overlooked a slow-moving creek, with willow trees lining the property. Gabrielle found the atmosphere peaceful. She checked in, politely declining any offers to help with her luggage. Once inside her room, she placed her portfolio on the small writing desk and opened it. Nestled among her papers and personal documents was a small velvet pouch. Carefully, she removed its contents. A polished badge that read, "Associate Justice, Supreme Court of the United States." A wave of conflicting emotions surged through her. That badge symbolized everything she had worked for: the years of relentless study, the battles against systemic barriers, the countless sleepless nights. Yet, at times, the weight of being the first or the only felt heavier than she let on. Since her appointment, the media had turned her into a symbol, a figurehead. She was proud to hold such an office, but the relentless spotlight could be suffocating. She turned her gaze to the window, watching the magnolia trees sway gently in the afternoon breeze. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if her late father, a civil rights attorney who had inspired her path, was watching over her. She could almost hear his voice, reminding her of the responsibility that came with the power to shape laws and precedents. If he were alive, he would tell her to stand her ground in Stonebridge, not just for herself, but for the principles of fairness and justice. Setting the badge aside, she made a few phone calls. One was to her assistant in Washington, D.C., letting them know she might be out of reach longer than expected. Another was to a trusted friend at the Department of Justice, discreetly inquiring about Stonebridge's civil rights record. She was careful with her words, not wanting to tip off anyone to her incognito status, but she made it clear that she was interested in the town's policing statistics. She had a strong suspicion that Officer Gerald Stone wasn't just an isolated case of bias. Small towns like this had a way of harboring entrenched power structures, unquestioned, unchecked, and often unaccountable. Gabrielle had spent much of her career fighting for transparency, believing that the justice system should serve the people, not intimidate them. As evening fell, Gabrielle ventured out to explore the town. She strolled past a modest library, a hardware store, and a small bakery, its warm aroma of freshly baked bread drifting onto the street. Some passers-by offered polite smiles, while others regarded her with wary glances. Stopping by the library, she used the public computers to sift through local news archives. What she found was unsettling. Scattered reports of police brutality allegations, all of which seemed to vanish without any follow-up. She took note of several names, but one stood out in particular: Jerry Stone. He had been mentioned in multiple civil complaints, yet none had ever made it to trial. Back at the Magnolia Inn, Gabrielle felt the weight of her discovery. The more she uncovered, the more convinced she became that what had happened to her was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern. The real question was whether she could expose it without revealing her identity too soon. The judge had scheduled a second hearing, and in a town like Stonebridge, that could take weeks. Gabrielle decided she would use that time wisely. If she could gather enough information, real, undeniable evidence, She might not only clear her own name but also bring to light the deep-seated corruption operating under Stonebridge's surface. She understood the risk. If her true identity were discovered, the media would swarm, shifting the narrative from a local injustice to a sensationalized story about a Supreme Court justice being harassed in a small town. That would overshadow the real problem. Gabrielle resolved to keep her identity hidden for as long as possible. But if the time came, she would reveal it in a way that ensured Stonebridge had no choice but to face the truth. What she didn't know was that Jerry Stone was already preparing his next move. He was determined to prove that no outsider, no matter how self-assured, could slip through his fingers. And this time, his actions would not only test Gabrielle's resolve but also unearth long-buried secrets, shattering Stonebridge's carefully maintained facade in ways no one could have foreseen. 2 days later, the soft glow of morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of Gabrielle's room at the Magnolia Inn. She woke early, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Over breakfast, a hearty plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast, she made small talk with Bernice Howard, who reminisced about how peaceful Stonebridge had been before the wave of new developments. But Gabrielle's thoughts were elsewhere. She had arranged a meeting with someone who might help her break open the system that protected Jerry Stone. Through a discreet network of contacts, she had secured the name of a local pastor, Reverend Ronald Peters. He was well known in neighboring communities as a vocal advocate against injustice. Gabrielle drove to Faith and Hope Baptist Church, a modest white building with a small steeple. Despite its simple exterior, there was an unmistakable sense of warmth and quiet defiance in the air. Inside, rows of wooden pews led up to a plain altar, while stained glass windows cast patches of multicolored light onto the worn carpet. Reverend Peters, a tall, middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard, welcomed her into his office. The space was cluttered with books and overflowing folders, a clear sign that his work extended far beyond Sunday sermons. His eyes, though kind, held a sharpness that suggested he was not easily deceived. "I hear you're looking into systemic issues in Stonebridge," he said, folding his hands atop his desk. "I take it you've already had a run-in with Officer Stone?" Gabrielle nodded. "I've had the displeasure. I'm conducting some personal research into how things operate here. I want to know if there's a pattern of harassment." Reverend Peters leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "A pattern? Stonebridge is a pattern. If you're not part of the inner circle, you're a target. Officer Stone has been a problem in this community for years, and he's not the only one, but he's the most brazen about it. Accusations of racism, excessive force, intimidation, they get filed and then they disappear. That is, if people bother to file them at all." Gabrielle's gaze drifted to the piles of paperwork cluttering his desk. "Where do these complaints go?" "Officially," Peters said, "to the police department's internal affairs or the county's board of supervisors, depending on the nature of the allegation. Unofficially, they get buried. Too many people here are afraid to speak out. And the ones who do," he shook his head, "they get bullied into silence." He motioned toward a nearby filing cabinet. "I've kept copies of some of the complaints, at least the ones that made it to me. I can share them with you, but I have to warn you, once you start digging, Stonebridge's power players will notice, and they don't like outsiders prying into their business." Gabrielle studied his expression carefully. "I understand. I'm willing to take that risk." The Reverend pulled open a drawer, retrieving a stack of folders. "I don't know your full story, Miss Townend, but I have a feeling you can handle yourself. Just promise me this. If you uncover something, don't just use it to protect yourself. Help the people who need it." Gabrielle met his gaze, her voice steady. "I promise." Taking the folders, she flipped through them, her stomach tightening as she read. A young black man beaten during a traffic stop. A Hispanic family intimidated into dropping a discrimination claim. A local activist who had left town after receiving death threats. This wasn't just about one officer abusing his authority. It was about an entire community being silenced. As she thanked Reverend Peters and stepped outside, her mind raced. She needed to be strategic. A single expose could make waves, but it could also be discredited, dismissed, or buried. If she wanted lasting change, she had to build an airtight case, with documented evidence, eyewitness accounts, and a plan to ensure the truth couldn't be ignored. What she didn't realize was that Jerry Stone had been watching her from across the street. Sitting in his cruiser, parked behind an old, rusted pickup truck, he peered through his tinted window as Gabrielle emerged from the church, folders in hand. His eyes narrowed. He recognized Reverend Peters as a known agitator, someone who frequently clashed with the town's establishment. Jerry's jaw clenched. His irritation flared into something more dangerous. She was digging, and he would make sure she regretted it. "You think you can just waltz in here, dig up dirt on me, and stroll out like nothing happened?" Jerry Stone muttered to himself. His jaw clenched as he watched Gabrielle from afar. If she wanted to pry into his affairs, maybe it was time she got a real taste of what happened to outsiders who didn't know their place. Later that evening, Gabrielle sat at the desk in her room, meticulously poring over the files. She took notes, cross-referencing names and dates. A troubling pattern emerged. The same handful of officers kept appearing in the reports. Jerry Stone, a deputy named Earl Buddy Crawton, a few others. The accusations followed a disturbingly predictable script. Routine traffic stops escalating into violence or threats, disproportionately targeting Black and Latino residents. Dashcam footage, conveniently missing. Complainants, often withdrawing their statements under questionable circumstances. Just as she was finishing a particularly disturbing testimony, her phone buzzed. The screen displayed an unknown number. Gabrielle hesitated. She rarely answered unlisted calls, but something in her gut told her this might be important. "Hello," a woman's voice, shaky and uncertain, came through the line. "Is this Miss Townend? I got your number from Reverend Peters. My name is Tasha Clark." Gabrielle straightened. "Yes, Tasha. Are you all right?" A tense pause crackled over the line before Tasha answered. "I don't know. I'm scared. Officer Stone, he's been harassing me and my fiancée for weeks. We tried filing complaints, but no one listens. Pastor Peters said you might be able to help." Gabrielle's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll do everything I can. Do you need me to come to you?" I don't know. Jerry Stone drives by our house late at night, just sitting there, shining his spotlight into our window. My fiancée wants to confront him, but I'm scared. What if we end up arrested or worse?" Gabrielle took a slow, steady breath. "First, try to stay calm. Keep a detailed record, times, dates, anything that happens. Second, if you feel immediately unsafe, call 911. Tasha let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Call 911? They're all in on it. That's the problem." Gabrielle closed her eyes. This was the reality people like Tasha faced. What do you do when those meant to protect you become the very threat? "All right," she said finally. "I understand. Just stay safe. And if anything happens, anything at all, call me. Day or night. We'll figure this out." They exchanged a few more words before Tasha hung up, still shaken. Gabrielle sat motionless for a moment, the phone resting in her palm. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. People's lives were at stake. If Jerry Stone found out Tasha was seeking outside help, he might escalate. Gabrielle had to be careful, very careful. The next morning, she decided to gather physical evidence of any new harassment. She drove past Tasha's house, a modest single-story home with a small porch. From a distance, she noted potential vantage points, places where a police cruiser could sit and observe without being noticed. She discreetly snapped photos, documenting the surroundings. Just as she was about to turn back toward the main road, a flash of blue and red lights filled her rearview mirror. Her stomach dropped. A Stonebridge police cruiser. She cursed under her breath, forcing herself to stay calm as she pulled over. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. The door of the cruiser creaked open, and sure enough, Jerry Stone approached her driver's side window. His face was twisted into a smug, condescending smirk. "Afternoon, Miss Townend," he drawled. "Lost, are we?" Gabrielle met his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. "No, Officer Stone. Is there a problem?" He pulled off his sunglasses, revealing those cold, gray eyes. You seem to be lingering in parts of town that can be dangerous. Wouldn't want to see you end up somewhere you don't belong. Gabrielle's jaw tightened. Last I checked, I'm free to drive on public roads. Jerry shrugged, slipping his sunglasses back on. Fair enough, but I've got my eye on you. We don't take kindly to strangers poking around, especially ones on probation with the court. Gabrielle handed over her license and registration, even though she knew he had no legitimate reason to stop her. Jerry took his time, pretending to inspect the documents, all while watching her like a predator sizing up its prey. Finally, he returned them. Drive safe, Miss Townend. He walked back to his cruiser, but instead of pulling away immediately, he lingered, sitting there, watching her, daring her to react. Gabrielle gripped the steering wheel, willing herself to stay composed. He wanted to rattle her, to make her feel helpless. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Eventually, he pulled away, but the message was clear. He wasn't going to let her do this without a fight. Over the next week, Gabrielle worked discreetly, forging connections with community members who had their own stories to tell. With Reverend Peters acting as a liaison, she began collecting first-hand accounts of police misconduct. She met with Tasha Clark and her fiancé, Damon, a soft-spoken mechanic with tired eyes that had seen too much. They described how Jerry and Deputy Croton had been tailing them, pulling them over for the smallest infractions, asking invasive questions that had nothing to do with traffic stops. Gabrielle documented everything: dates, times, exact words spoken. Tasha also showed her text messages from an unknown number, threats, warnings to stay quiet or face the consequences. The number was untraceable, but Gabrielle had no doubt who was behind it. Quietly, she also began studying legal statutes, preparing herself for the battle ahead, because she knew now this wouldn't end with a few reports or articles. To bring real change, she would have to take on the entire system. Gabrielle knew the intricacies of federal civil rights laws, legal tools that could be used against officers who engaged in systemic misconduct. Gathering evidence was one thing, ensuring it would hold up in court was another. She needed irrefutable documentation or credible witness testimony to make an airtight case. Meanwhile, Jerry's presence loomed like a storm cloud over her every move. He had taken to accidentally bumping into her around town, at the grocery store, the gas station, even the library. Each encounter was charged with silent hostility, a subtle reminder that he was watching. One drizzly afternoon, Gabrielle returned to the Magnolia Inn and found a note slipped under her door. "Leave now or you'll regret it." There was no signature, and the handwriting was blocky, as if the writer were deliberately disguising their script. But Gabrielle had no doubt about the source. She took the note to Bernice Howard, the elderly innkeeper, who frowned in concern. "Should we call the authorities?" Bernice asked gently. Gabrielle forced a reassuring smile. "I'll handle it, but if you notice anything unusual, let me know immediately." Bernice nodded, worry clear in her expression. "We don't want trouble here, dear." "I understand," Gabrielle said firmly. "Trust me. I'm working to fix it so you won't have to worry anymore." Shortly after, her phone rang. Another unknown number. This time, however, the caller identified herself. "My name is Linda Carter. I'm an attorney. I represented one of Jerry Stone's past victims." Gabrielle straightened in her chair. "I heard through the grapevine that you're collecting evidence," Linda continued. "A year ago, I tried to build a case against Jerry, but I couldn't get enough community support to see it through." Gabrielle's grip tightened on the phone. "People were too afraid to speak up?" "Terrified," Linda confirmed. "When I finally convinced a few to sign affidavits, the retaliation was relentless. Anonymous threats, vandalism, people losing their jobs. It was a full-scale campaign of intimidation." Gabrielle exhaled slowly. "I'm gathering more evidence. If I can compile enough, do you think we could file a federal civil rights lawsuit?" "Potentially, yes," Linda said. "But we'd need the DOJ on our side. Local and state agencies here are compromised. If we take this route, we'd better have a mountain of evidence. Officer Stone has friends in high places who will do whatever it takes to protect him and themselves. Gabrielle ended the call feeling both encouraged and anxious. Building a case was possible, but if she went through with this, the ramifications would be massive. She had to make sure that when the hammer fell, it would fall swiftly and decisively. The next morning, Gabrielle reached out to a trusted contact at the Department of Justice. This time, she was more direct. "I need to speak with someone in the Civil Rights Division. Off the record." Her friend hesitated. "Gabrielle, what are you involved in? You're supposed to be on sabbatical." She inhaled deeply. "Let's just say my sabbatical took an unexpected turn. I'm close to exposing a pattern of serious civil rights violations in Stonebridge, Virginia. I need guidance on how to compile the evidence so the DOJ can act quickly." "I'll see what I can do," her friend replied. "But we have to be careful. If word gets out that you're involved, it'll make headlines." Gabrielle closed her eyes, picturing the inevitable media frenzy. If the public found out that a Supreme Court justice was working undercover in a small town, the situation would explode. But then she thought about Tasha, Damon, Reverend Peters, and all the others who had been victimized. Their courage to speak out deserved a champion, someone willing to take risks. That afternoon, she drove to Richmond to meet Linda Carter in person. The meeting took place in a modest law office above a small bakery, the scent of fresh pastries filling the air. For the next 2 hours, they strategized how to collect affidavits, secure eyewitness statements, potentially involve federal authorities. But Linda posed the bigger question: how do we protect the witnesses? She leaned forward. "If Stone or his associates find out what we're doing, they'll retaliate." Gabrielle's expression remained unreadable. "I have resources." Linda studied her. "What kind of resources?" "I can't explain everything yet," Gabrielle admitted carefully. "But if we do this right, we'll have powerful backing. Once we drop the bombshell, Stonebridge officials won't be able to cover it up." Linda narrowed her eyes. "You talk like someone with a powerful ace up her sleeve." Gabrielle offered a small, knowing smile, but there was sadness in it. "Let's just say I've had experience with high-stakes legal battles." That night, back at the Magnolia Inn, Gabrielle locked her door and booted up her laptop. She drafted a secure memo detailing everything she had uncovered so far, encrypted it, then uploaded it to a secure server in DC. If anything happened to her, her colleagues would know where to look. Outside, the moon cast a pale glow over the magnolia trees. She sat at the edge of the bed, holding her Supreme Court badge in her hands. How many times had she invoked the weight of her office in pursuit of justice? But this time, she needed to be more than a judge behind a bench. She had to be an active catalyst for change. Across town, in a dimly lit garage, Jerry Stone stood with Deputy Croton. The air was thick with the smell of motor oil and stale cigarettes. Jerry paced, his expression twisted with frustration. "I can't have this town-and woman snooping around anymore." Croton, a tall, wiry man with restless eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "What do we do, boss? We can't just arrest her without cause." Jerry's face darkened. He looked unhinged. "We catch her doing something, anything. If we have to, we plant evidence." Croton swallowed hard. "I don't know, Jerry. She's smart. If we set her up, it could backfire." Jerry clenched his fists. "Then we just have to make sure it doesn't." Jerry's jaw tightened. "Not if we do it right," he muttered. "We're cops, buddy. Our word against hers. She's already been flagged by the court for that traffic incident. All we have to do is push a little more. Trust me." Days passed, each one thick with tension. Gabrielle pressed on with her investigation, quietly gathering statements from individuals who had suffered under Jerry Stone's abuse of power. She and Linda Carter painstakingly compiled the testimonies into a cohesive, compelling case, one strong enough to draw federal attention, and ultimately bring down Stone's reign of terror. But as Gabrielle had suspected, Jerry was just as determined to destroy her. One evening, she received a frantic text from Tasha. "He's here again. shining lights in our windows. Gabrielle's pulse quickened. She grabbed her phone, jumped into her car, and raced toward Tasha's neighborhood. When she arrived, she spotted Jerry's patrol car parked at the curb, its headlights glaring into Tasha's home. He was hunched over his in-car computer, typing. Gabrielle immediately started filming. From a safe distance, she recorded the scene. Jerry's cruiser, the blinding lights illuminating the windows, the unmistakable act of intimidation. Then Jerry looked up and locked eyes with her. Without hesitation, he pulled away from Tasha's house and revved his engine, steering directly toward Gabrielle. She stood her ground but took a cautious step off the road, giving him no excuse for a confrontation. Jerry brought his cruiser to a halt beside her, rolling down his window. "Out for a stroll, Miss Townsend?" His voice was smooth, mocking. "I'm documenting harassment," Gabrielle said evenly, keeping her phone's camera subtly angled. "Which is well within my rights." Jerry feigned confusion. "Harassment? Now why would I harass anyone? I'm just patrolling." She met his gaze, unwavering. "Then you won't mind if I continue documenting, Officer Stone." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He turned away abruptly. "Just don't get in my way," he muttered. Then, with a screech of tires, he sped off. Gabrielle exhaled, realizing only then that she'd been holding her breath. The encounter had been tense, but she had a strong feeling that as long as her phone was recording, Jerry wouldn't risk anything too overt. Still, it was clear the situation was escalating. Late that night, back at the Magnolia Inn, Gabrielle lay awake, tossing and turning. Her mind replayed the threats, the intimidation, the ever-tightening noose around her investigation. Finally, she gave up on sleep. She got up, opened her laptop, and composed an encrypted email to a close colleague on the Supreme Court, Justice Maria Hernandez, someone she trusted implicitly. Without revealing too much, Gabrielle outlined the broad strokes of what she had uncovered: a systemic pattern of civil rights abuses in Stonebridge, and requested discreet guidance on ensuring a fair federal investigation. She hit send, hoping her friend would grasp the gravity of the situation. Days passed without a response. Not surprising, considering the high-security protocols surrounding Supreme Court communications. Meanwhile, Jerry and Deputy Croton seemed to be everywhere she went. It felt as though they had a rotating watch on her movements. On a hunch, Gabrielle searched her car for a GPS tracking device but found nothing obvious. She started changing her routes, keeping a sharp eye on her surroundings. Then, finally, a breakthrough. Linda Carter called, her voice charged with excitement. "Gabrielle, we have something. A local mother, Adele Parker, has agreed to speak out. Her son was brutally handled by Jerry Stone 6 months ago. She's willing to go public." Gabrielle sat up straight. "Does she have evidence?" "Hospital records," Linda confirmed. "His injuries are consistent with excessive force, and her story aligns with 2 other cases we've documented. If we get her sworn statement, it will be a bombshell." Gabrielle felt a wave of relief. "This is huge. Let's meet and finalize the affidavit." They arranged to meet that afternoon at Linda's office. The plan was for Gabrielle to be present quietly, offering moral support and ensuring that the statement met the necessary legal standards. After that, Linda would compile the affidavits and forward them directly to the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. Gabrielle arrived at the law office above the bakery, the scent of cinnamon rolls and fresh bread lingering in the air. Inside, she found Linda and Adele Parker seated in a small conference room, reviewing documents. Adele looked nervous but determined. Her hands trembled as she described her son's ordeal. Minutes into the conversation, Gabrielle's phone rang. She stepped into the hallway to answer. It was Bernice Howard from the Magnolia Inn. Her voice was tight with panic. "Gabrielle, there's been an incident. Someone broke into your room." Gabrielle's stomach clenched. "Did they take anything?" "I don't know," Bernice said. "I haven't touched anything." The door was forced open. "The police are here now." Gabrielle's blood ran cold. "Which officer responded?" There was a pause. Then, "Deputy Croton." She gritted her teeth. This wasn't a coincidence. Jerry or Croton could have staged the break-in, searching her belongings for evidence. "I'm on my way," she said, ending the call. Back in the room, she turned to Linda and Adele. "I have to go. Someone broke into my room." Linda's eyes darkened. "Gabrielle, this might be a setup." "I know," Gabrielle said grimly. "Finish Adele's statement. Send it to the DOJ the moment it's done. Don't wait for me." Half an hour later, Gabrielle pulled up to the Magnolia Inn. Croton's cruiser was parked out front, lights flashing. Bernice stood near the entrance, wringing her hands. Gabrielle approached cautiously, her phone's recorder running in her pocket. "What happened here?" she asked. Croton stepped forward, wearing a practiced frown. "Looks like someone forced their way into your room, Miss Townsend. We're investigating." Gabrielle's eyes flickered toward Bernice, who gave a small, shaky nod. "Was anything stolen?" Gabrielle pressed. Croton shrugged. "Can't say yet. Looks like someone went through your papers." The morning of Gabrielle's second hearing dawned gray and rainy, as if the weather itself braced for a storm. She dressed conservatively in a navy blue suit, her hair pulled into a tight bun. A swirl of nervous energy coiled in her stomach, but she reminded herself, this was just a municipal court. She had stood in far grander halls, faced legal battles that shaped the nation. But this case was different. This was personal, and far more dangerous. Jerry Stone was already seated in the courtroom when Gabrielle arrived, chatting casually with Deputy Croton and a few other officers. As she walked past, he shot her a smug grin. She ignored him, instead focusing on Linda Carter and the several witnesses who had come to show their support. Tasha, Damon, Adele, and others filed in quietly, each wearing a tense expression. Judge Marion Lewis entered, calling the court to order. Gabrielle's case was the first on the docket. The clerk read out the charges: failure to comply with a traffic stop, refusal to sign a citation, and obstruction of an officer. The judge peered at Gabrielle over his glasses. "Miss Townsend, have you secured legal representation?" She stood. "I intend to represent myself, Your Honor." A faint lift of the judge's eyebrow suggested mild surprise, but he gave a short nod. "Officer Stone, are you prepared to present evidence?" Jerry rose with practiced confidence. "Yes, Your Honor. I have my incident report and my testimony." Judge Lewis cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, I need to address some concerns. There have been rumblings around town about harassment and intimidation connected to this case. Let me be clear. I will not tolerate any unlawful conduct within these proceedings. Do both parties understand?" Jerry gave a stiff nod. "Of course, Your Honor." Gabrielle nodded as well. "I understand very well. Proceed, Officer Stone." Jerry launched into his version of events, portraying Gabrielle as belligerent and uncooperative. He claimed she had shouted at him, refused to hand over her driver's license, and repeatedly challenged his authority in an aggressive manner. Gabrielle sat still, her jaw tightening at the blatant lies. Around the room, spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When Jerry finished, the judge turned to Gabrielle. "Your response, Miss Townsend?" Gabrielle inhaled slowly, gathering her thoughts. "Your Honor, I have the utmost respect for law enforcement. However, the events as described by Officer Stone did not occur the way he claims. I have evidence, including witness testimony and records of the officer's prior misconduct, that directly contradict his account." Jerry scoffed, but the judge shot him a warning look. "Miss Townsend, I'm willing to consider your evidence, but it must be relevant to the specific charges against you." She nodded. "Understood, Your Honor. First, I'd like to call Mr. Damon Cole, who witnessed part of the incident." Damon hesitantly stepped forward, clearly nervous. He described seeing Gabrielle's traffic stop, explaining that she had remained calm throughout the interaction while Jerry escalated the situation, threatening her with arrest simply for asking questions. The judge took notes, occasionally glancing over his glasses at Jerry, who sat stone-faced. When Damon finished, Gabrielle called Tasha, who confirmed her fiancé's account. "Your Honor, Gabrielle continued. I also have records and statements from multiple individuals in this community who allege that Officer Stone has engaged in a consistent pattern of harassment, particularly targeting people of color. While this case specifically concerns my traffic stop, the broader pattern is relevant to assessing Officer Stone's credibility or lack thereof. Judge Lewis frowned. Miss Townsend, this is beginning to sound like an attempt to attack Officer Stone's character. With all due respect, Your Honor, Gabrielle interjected. I am prepared to demonstrate that Officer Stone has a documented history of fabricating or exaggerating charges. That directly affects his credibility in this case. The judge glanced at Jerry, whose face was now taut with barely concealed anger. Finally, after a long pause, Judge Lewis said, I will allow it, but keep it brief and relevant. Gabrielle nodded, then presented a concise summary of the witness affidavits, along with civil complaints against Jerry, complaints that had mysteriously been dismissed without proper investigation. Linda Carter stood, confirming that the documents were indeed filed with the county records office but had been ignored or buried. A shift in the room's energy was palpable. A murmur rippled through the audience. Jerry's face darkened, his jaw working as though he were grinding his teeth. Finally, the judge turned to Jerry. Officer Stone, do you have any response to these allegations? Jerry stood, feigning composure. Your Honor, these so-called complaints come from troublemakers who have grudges against law enforcement. I do my job. I uphold the law. If Miss Townsend is trying to avoid her own charges by dragging my name through the mud, that should tell you everything you need to know about her. Judge Lewis rubbed his temples. I've heard enough for today. I will review the submitted documents and issue a ruling. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. With a bang of the gavel, the proceedings ended. As people began filing out, Gabrielle gathered her papers, her heart still pounding. She could tell she had made an impact, but she also knew that Jerry wouldn't let her win easily. Sure enough, as she stepped outside, Jerry caught up to her. You think you're clever, don't you? He hissed, keeping his voice low. Gabrielle met his gaze head-on. I simply told the truth. Isn't that what courts are for? He leaned in, his face inches from hers. If you think some affidavits and sob stories are going to bring me down, you're delusional. I'm Stonebridge's finest, and I have friends in high places. She refused to step back. Funny you should mention high places. Be careful who you threaten. Jerry snorted. I'm not afraid of you. Gabrielle gave him a tight smile. You should be. With that, she walked past him, leaving him fuming. The sky had darkened further, and raindrops splattered against the pavement. Linda and the witnesses exchanged uneasy glances. Tasha stepped closer, concern etched across her face. Are you sure you know what you're doing, Miss Townsend? Gabrielle patted her shoulder reassuringly. Trust me, this isn't over yet. With that, they parted ways and Gabrielle drove back to the Magnolia Inn. Taking the back roads to avoid any potential tail, Gabrielle half expected Jerry to emerge from some hidden corner. Once inside her room, she checked her phone for updates. There was an email from her Supreme Court colleague, Justice Hernandez. Call me immediately. Important. Morning arrived with thunder and heavy rain, as if the heavens themselves were unleashing their fury. Gabrielle strode into the courthouse with unwavering determination, the Supreme Court badge tucked securely in her pocket. She spotted Tasha, Damon, Adele, and Linda Carter whispering among themselves, exchanging tense glances. As soon as the court session resumed, Judge Lewis wasted no time. Miss Townsend, Officer Stone, after reviewing the documents submitted, I find sufficient cause to question the original charges against Miss Townsend. However, I must also follow procedure in determining whether these broader misconduct allegations warrant a separate investigation or if they fall outside the scope of this traffic offense. Jerry shot to his feet, his face twisted with indignation. Your Honor, I object. This is a simple traffic case. She was speeding and refused to comply. All this talk of misconduct is irrelevant. Gabrielle maintained a calm, composed expression. Your Honor, These misconduct allegations go directly to Officer Stone's credibility in accusing me of obstruction. If he has falsified reports in the past, it calls into question the validity of his allegations against me now. The judge nodded thoughtfully. I'll allow that. However, I must also emphasize that if this is indeed a pattern of misconduct, it may require intervention beyond this court's authority. Gabrielle recognized the opening. Reaching into her pocket, she felt the cool metal of her badge. In that moment, she made a snap decision, no more half measures. Her voice was steady as she spoke. Your Honor, I agree that this matter may require higher intervention. In fact, I have already alerted federal authorities. For the record, I am not merely Miss Townsend. My full legal name is Gabrielle Antonia Townsend Davis, Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. A ripple of shock surged through the courtroom. Gasps echoed. Tasha's eyes widened, and Linda Carter dropped a folder in sheer astonishment. Judge Lewis looked momentarily speechless, his jaw slack. Jerry's face drained of color. The silence was profound. Finally, Judge Lewis found his voice. Justice Davis. Gabrielle calmly removed the small leather case from her pocket, flipping it open to reveal her official Supreme Court badge. I've been on sabbatical, Your Honor. I came to Stonebridge for personal reasons, but I encountered a situation I could not ignore. Camera phones appeared, silently flashing as people recorded the moment. Jerry stammered. Tach, this is some kind of trick. Gabrielle turned to him, her gaze unwavering. Officer Stone, you have systematically harassed members of this community, myself included, under the guise of law enforcement. I have ample evidence of your wrongdoing. The Department of Justice has been notified, and an investigation is already underway. Judge Lewis seemed to recover from his initial shock. This is highly unusual, Justice Davis. Your presence here under a pseudonym. I understand, Your Honor, Gabrielle said evenly. Had I arrived with fanfare, certain truths might never have come to light. I acted in good faith to uphold the principles of justice. The judge appeared deep in thought, weighing his next words carefully. At last, he turned to Jerry Stone. Officer Stone, in light of these revelations and the evidence presented, I have no choice but to dismiss the charges against Justice Davis. Furthermore, I am requesting a formal inquiry into your actions, as well as the broader practices of the Stonebridge Police Department. Jerry's face contorted with fury. You can't do that, he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. I know my rights. This is my town. Judge Lewis banged his gavel. Order in the court. Officer Stone, one more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. A hush fell over the room. The energy had shifted. The balance of power had irrevocably tipped. Gabrielle turned to the spectators, lowering her voice. I came here expecting a peaceful sabbatical. Instead, I found a community in need. Let today mark a turning point for Stonebridge. You have the right to demand accountability from those who serve you. Linda Carter's eyes glistened with relief and admiration. Tasha and Damon exchanged hopeful, amazed smiles. Adele nodded, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Outside, the rain had stopped. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the courthouse steps as people poured out, abuzz with shock and excitement. Reporters, tipped off by onlookers' phone footage, had begun to arrive, clamoring for a statement. Gabrielle briefly addressed the crowd, careful not to reveal details that might jeopardize ongoing investigations. I stand with the people of Stonebridge who have suffered injustice. Please direct any further questions to the Department of Justice. Cameras flashed, questions flew, but Gabrielle moved swiftly through the throng, accompanied by Linda Carter, Tasha, Damon, and Adele. Jerry lingered in the courthouse doorway, his eyes blazing with hatred. His allies, Deputy Croton among them, hovered nearby, uncertain, watching as the world they once controlled slipped from their grasp. And so ended the tumultuous courtroom showdown that shook a community to its core. What began as a routine traffic stop escalated into a battle between a corrupt officer and a composed black woman, who, unbeknownst to him, wielded the power of the Supreme Court. In a stunning turn of events, The very system Officer Stone believed he controlled crumbled under the unwavering resolve of Justice Gabrielle Davis. But this story isn't just about one officer's downfall. It's about the courage of ordinary citizens who dared to speak truth to power. If this story moved you, if it made you question your own assumptions about justice and accountability, then help spread its message. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Because justice isn't just an institution, it's a shared responsibility.